the world of The Witcher, there exist many fantastic, magical creatures. Dragons, for example, are quite magical indeed, but one other creature may well rival a dragon's power, or even exceed it: the unicorn. Without wanting to go too deeply into the ins and outs of unicorns, we'll save that for another time. One such unicorn was Ihuarraquax, and we meet this particular unicorn in the Korath Desert, where Ciri of Sintra wanders, hungry, thirsty, and alone, until she meets Ihuarraquax, a young unicorn as hungry, thirsty, and alone as she is. It was a little frightened of Ciri at first, as she was of him, but they soon became accustomed to each other and attempted to brave the desert together. The unicorn, which Ciri had lovingly named Little Horse, had even found her some water. Without this little unicorn, Ciri would have surely died in that desert, hungry, thirsty, and alone. They conquered the desert, eating whatever they could find, and Little Horse did eat the strangest things, like crushed scorpions, acidic ants, and yellow thistles. At night he slept standing, and during the day they would travel ever further towards the mountain range surrounding the desert. Eventually, as the lack of water started weighing on Ciri's mind, Ihuarraquax let out a shrill whinny and galloped down between some jagged rocks towards a strange hole in the ground. Thinking it was water again, they both approached, but to their horror, this strange pit was anything but safe. As soon as they got too close, the pit exploded in sand and gravel, and a monster revealed itself at the center. Hooked pincers emerged, and Ciri screamed as Ihuarraquax started losing his footing, getting himself caught in one of the monster's claws. Helplessly, the unicorn was being dragged towards the center of the pit, into the monster's gaping maw, no doubt. Eventually, seeing no other way, Ciri conjured as much magical force as she could to blow away the sand, revealing the monster entirely. The monster, not fond of being out in the open like this, immediately released Ihuarraquax and started burrowing back into the sand, but Ciri wasn't about to let it get away. She leapt and struck the creature, once, then twice, but the beast had burrowed itself again and resumed its attack. This time it was Little Horse who saved Ciri instead. He charged to the crater floor, striking his hooves against the area of sand that contained the monster. The force of the kick dispersed the sand enough for Little Horse to thrust his horn deep into the monster's back, where the claws couldn't reach. At the same time, Ciri took the opportunity to attack again, striking and striking until the body moved no more. Together, they had finally managed to defeat it. Unfortunately, though, Ihuarraquax had been mortally wounded during the fight. Blood spilled from his thigh, but he would not allow Ciri to take a closer look for now, and so they walked on, only stepping on solid ground from this point on, until they reached the edge of the desert, where Little Horse collapsed for the night, exhausted from the loss of blood. To her horror, Ciri also realized that the monster had been poisonous if she didn't do something quick. Ihuarraquax was not long for this world. The next day he did not improve. The unicorn could hardly walk. Eventually, in the afternoon, he lay down on some rocks and refused to rise. His wounds stank terribly, and Ciri was at a loss on how to help him, how to save him. Night fell, and Ciri lamented that she was never taught healing magic, only magic that destroyed, magic that killed. Still, distraught and desperate as she was, she began searching for magical veins, but she could find none. Until finally she decided that using fire as a source of magic was her only way out now, dangerous or not. She started a fire, and without knowing precisely how she did so, she tapped into its power, the force filling her like molten lead. With her newfound strength, she shouted an incantation she did not know, yet the words left her lips with confidence, and Ihuarraquax was whole again. He stood up in disbelief and quickly galloped away from the fire, away from Ciri who was now under the flame's spell. When he returned, Ciri still enthralled by fire, he brought with him his herd, fully grown unicorns that neighed wildly around the wall of flames surrounding the Lady of Time and Space. Just in time to hear Ciri reject this power that came at too high a cost. The fire faded, and Ciri fell to the floor. The unicorns around her, unbeknownst to her, then debated whether to kill her. She had far too much power. However, they eventually decided not to, as it was only thanks to her that Ihuarraquax survived and rejoined his herd, not to mention her rejection of this power. It would be a very long time until Ciri would once more reunite with her little horse. After she was swept away to the world of the NL, she found herself inside a circle of stones, where at once 2 unicorns appeared that pierced her arms with their horns, and then a third one appeared, Ihuarraquax. He was completely white, from the tips of his ears to the end of his tail. Only his nostrils were pink and his eyes black. He put his head in her lap, and in her mind, Ciri could hear him speak. "I've grown," resounded in her head. "I've grown, Star-Eye. Back then in the desert I didn't know how to behave. Now I know." "Little horse?" she moaned, still almost hanging from the 2 horns piercing her. "My name is Ihuarraquax. Do you remember me, Star-Eye? Do you remember treating me, saving me?" Ciri had found the now home of the unicorns in Tirnalia. Needless to say, she wasn't thrilled with her reception and exploded on the unicorns almost immediately, accusing them of wanting to use her for her powers as well. However, they revealed to her that they don't need to use her for anything. They already have the same powers she does. No, instead, they wish to keep her power away from the NL to safeguard other worlds. They want to help her escape. Ciri, knowing little of her own powers at this time regardless, agrees on one condition. Ihuarraquax comes with her. And so, in the dead of night, Ciri slipped away, meeting Little Horse near the borders of their land. Before they left that world completely, though, Ihuarraquax had to show her something. He had to show her the extent of the NL's cruelty. He led Ciri to a nearby gorge, where she found a mountain of skulls and bones. The old inhabitants of that world, humans. Ciri shouted at the heavens, "Rogues! Murderers!" But they couldn't stay. Her captors were already on their trail. Star-Eye and Little Horse ran. They ran for their lives and disappeared into another realm. From then on, Ciri and Ihuarraquax jumped from realm to realm. From time to time, they tore through the fabric of space. Together, Ciri on her trusty horse, Kelpie, searching for the right place and the right time. But Ciri did not control her powers fully yet, and while the unicorn was still trying to teach her, the NL found her again. Their Diagruadri, Red Riders, stormed into the world Ciri had just entered and attacked. Ihuarraquax had no choice but to distract them, fight to allow Ciri a chance to escape. He could not allow her to get caught. So Ciri fled, alone, leaving Little Horse behind as she jumped once more through time and space. Now it was just Ciri and Kelpie, with no one to guide her. The path home became more difficult, more lonely, and more frightening, but she would not allow herself to be beaten so easily. She persevered, until finally she found the right place and the right time. She found the hideout of Vilgefortz. Although she didn't find Ihuarraquax here, of course. No, that wouldn't happen until much later. The place, Rivia, the Elm District. The time, 1268, the 6th of June. Geralt of Rivia had just been stabbed to death by a pitchfork, and as Ciri stood and watched, Yennefer of Vengerberg used the last of her strength in an attempt to save his life, losing her own in the process. Ciri lamented the loss of her magic now, sure that she could save Geralt had she been able to cast spells. But just at that moment, Ihuarraquax decided to make his entrance. It suddenly became very cold. The surface of the lake, filled with fog like a sorceress's cauldron, became enveloped in mist. The fog rose swiftly, billowed over the water, and rolled onto the land in waves, enveloping everything in a thick, white milk, in which sounds grew quieter and died away, in which shapes vanished and forms blurred. "And I once renounced my power," said Ciri slowly, still kneeling on the blood-soaked cobbles. "Had I not renounced it, I would have saved him now. I would have healed him, I know it. But it's too late. I renounced it now and I can't do anything. It's as though I've killed him." The silence was first interrupted by Kelpie's loud neighing, then by Dandelion's muffled cry. Then they were all struck dumb. A white unicorn emerged from the fog, running very lightly, ethereally, and noiselessly, gracefully raising its shapely head. There actually wasn't anything unusual in that. Everybody knew the legends, and they were unanimous about unicorns running very lightly, ethereally, and noiselessly, and raising their heads with characteristic grace. If anything was strange, it was that the unicorn was running over the surface of the water, and the water wasn't even rippling. Dandelion groaned, but this time in awe. Triss felt herself being seized by a thrill, By Euphoria! The unicorn clattered its hooves on the stone boulevard. It shook its mane and neighed, lengthily and melodically. Ihuarraquax, said Ciri. I'd hoped you'd come. No words are spoken between them after this, but when Ciri reaches out to touch the unicorn's now glowing horn, her own eyes lit up with a milky glow, her body surrounded by a fiery halo. She pointed at Geralt, and a ribbon of flickering brightness that glowed like lava flowed from her fingers. Ihuarraquax had also summoned a boat, and though we cannot hear the no doubt telepathic conversation he and Ciri were having at the time, the boat was quite clearly magical. He pointed at the vessel, then motioned for Ciri's horse, Kelpie, to follow him into the mist. As she did, both creatures vanished. As the Arthurian legend now goes, Geralt and Yennefer were placed into the boat, and Ciri carried them to the Isle of Avalach, where she left them together. The Lady of Time and Space herself followed Ihuarraquax and Kelpie to the lands of King Arthur, where the unicorn left his once companion for the very last time, having fulfilled his duty as her guide, guardian, and friend.